south bank of the River Thames in London to commemorate World Children's Day, which was this week, by highlighting the plight of Palestinian child prisoners caged in Israeli dungeons. Just last Sunday, the 17th of November, Israel abducted 4 Palestinians, including 2 children from their homes in Silwan on the West Bank. They broke into their homes at dawn while the children were asleep and ransacked their homes before dragging Ahmad and Jawad Hamid, both 13 years old, from the arms of their parents into the darkness without any charge or warrant for their arrest. What happens to these abducted children? Figures for Jerusalem show that 40% of the children were sexually abused by Israeli soldiers during arrest or interrogation. During interrogation, 75% of Palestinian children detained by Israel are physically tortured, 55% are stripped naked and left there standing naked, shackled and blindfolded for periods of time to intimidate them. They are threatened with rape and castration. The United Nations Rights of the Child report documents that the brutal torture of Palestinian children as standard practice during interrogations in order to coerce confessions, usually to stone throwing, which carries a sentence of up to 20 years imprisonment. In the words of the United Nations Rights of the Child report on the 14th of July 2013, children are systematically subject to degrading treatment and often to acts of torture, physical and verbal violence, humiliation, painful restraints, hooding of the head and face in a sack and threatened with death, physical violence and sexual assault against themselves or members of their family, restricted access to toilet, food and water. These crimes are perpetrated from the time of arrest and during transfer and interrogation to obtain a confession, but also on an arbitrary basis as testified by several Israeli soldiers, as well as during pre-trial detention. That was a direct quote from the United Nations Rights of the Child report on the 14th of July 2013.
The Public Committee Against Torture in Israel states that over 1,000 complaints of torture have been submitted, many by young children, but not a single complaint has led to a criminal investigation, let alone a trial or a conviction. Israeli law has never criminalized torture, and whilst Israel is a signatory to the UN Conventions against torture, it insists that it doesn't apply to Palestinians. Women prisoners have been electrocuted into submission. 72 Palestinian prisoners have been tortured to death since 1967. One such case was that of Palestinian father Arafat Jaradat, where even an Israeli doctor participated in the torture which led to his death. The torturer, in his defense, blamed the doctor for having okayed the final round of torture that Arafat's frail body, after 5 days of intense torture, could no longer take, resulting in his death. Prison doctors lied that Arafat had died of a heart attack, but the autopsy carried out outside the prison at the National Israeli Forensic Medicine Center showed no sign of heart failure or any other illness, but revealed broken bones and found his whole body was covered in strong and excessive bruising. Under the skin, inside the muscle, and along the spine at the bottom of the neck, deep inside the tissue. The autopsy determined the cause of death. Nervous shock as a result of extreme pain from the intensity of the injuries, which resulted from multiple direct and extensive acts of torture.
Last month, in October 2019, two Palestinian teens, Yidel Amer and Hafiz Jude, both from Jenin, were issued administrative detention orders. Yidel, at the end of last year, was issued a 6-month administrative detention order. 2 days before the end of the 6 months, Israel renewed the administrative detention for another 6 months. Hafiz was abducted in September and has now been given an initial 4-month administrative detention order. Both are currently caged in the children's section of Megiddo prison. Nidel's uncle Ahmed pleaded, quote, "What has the child done to warrant being locked up without any legal case? If there is no charge, then why is the child caged? If there is evidence against him for anything, then it should be presented in court."
I want to end by sharing a couple of examples of the arrest and detention of ordinary Palestinian children. Asala Abu Rayyan, a child, 15 years old, a schoolgirl, Asala Abu Rayyan, was with her cousin Manar when Israeli occupation forces started firing at the girls. The girls were injured with Asala being shot in the hand. The Red Cross ambulance taking the girls to hospital was stopped by Israeli soldiers at gunpoint. The soldiers entered the ambulance and started beating the injured girls inside the ambulance before dragging them out. Asala's hijab was ripped off her head, and her head was slammed against the jeep. The whole brutal episode was captured on video. Part of the soldier's rifle, the sniper scope, and a stand. We were later found in the ambulance, having broken off during the violent beating. The abducted girls were taken to the police. to the police station in the illegal settlement of Kiryat Arba, where they were tortured. They were hit on their heads and insulted and put in freezing cold container, which was open at the bottom. This attack on a Red Cross ambulance was in contravention of the 4th Geneva Convention and constitutes a war crime. The girls had committed no crime and weren't even accused of committing a crime, and yet they were tortured. Eventually, in exchange for the rifle parts left in the ambulance, the girls were released without charge. Fawzi Al-Junaidi, due to his father's injury and his mother's terminal illness, 16 years old Fawzi Al-Junaidi is the breadwinner in his family. He sacrificed his education to support his family. When he was shopping for groceries, he was ambushed by over 2,000 Israeli soldiers. He was severely beaten during arrest and tortured during interrogations. Photos of his arrest, blindfolded, disorientated with torn jeans, surrounded by over 25 armed occupation troops wearing armor. Padding has gone viral. Almost every soldier who ambushed him took turns to beat him with their rifle bats. He was so badly beaten, one of his upper ribs moved 3 centimeters out of place after repeatedly being struck with a rifle. The soldiers also dislocated his shoulder. His whole body was covered in bruises. The beating continued during interrogation. At one point, he hid under the desk in the detention center for cover, but they pulled him back up and continued to savagely beat him. They then threw him into a tube filled with cold water and took his shoes off and crushed his legs, trying to get him to confess to throwing a stone, a charge that carries a 20-year sentence. He was left bound on a concrete floor, denied medical treatment for 4 days until a judge ordered him being taken to hospital. Even in hospital, the interrogation continued, with the soldiers threatening him if he didn't confess. With his condition rapidly deteriorating, he was finally given bail 14 days later on ransom of 10,000 shekels. As soon as he was released, he was rushed to hospital. These were just a couple of examples of the thousands of Palestinian children that have suffered in Israeli dungeons, and the hundreds that are suffering today. Right now, caged in Israeli dungeons, defenseless against their tortures. Free Palestine now! Free Palestine now! Free the Palestinian children now! Stop the torture! Stop the killing of Palestinian children!
Facing this way, yeah? And if you
Voici la racine, restant piqué dans ce combat. Palestine, on te ressent comme un éclat. Le soleil dans le froid et la brise. Tu restes droit par ceux qui méprisent. Tes droits et ta foi, Palestine. Il existe et se bat, Palestine. On peut mal vers ta Palestine. C'est le combat, Palestine. Palestine, rien de fort encore. À l'infini, j'aimerais qu'on voit en toi le reflet de l'estime que ton être humain ont pour toi. Des racines à la racine, reste impliqué dans ce combat. Palestine. Qui à chaque pays, la bravo dans combat. J'aimerais qu'on voit en toi le reflet de l'estime que ton être humain pour toi. Les racines à la racine, dans ce combat. Il est clair et évident qu'il y a une certaine mainmise de la politique en France qui nous brise et nous brise. La LBJ interdite là-bas comme aux USA.
Oui.
Luego por allí tenemos que seguir otros más para allá.
Really know what are you talking about.